Although we are sharing this year's events virtually, the festival is based in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and we respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has been lost forever and can never be recovered. We also acknowledge the island of Uktahumguk, Newfoundland, as the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq, and we acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Ntsinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatuhavut. We recognize all First Peoples who are here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First Peoples have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all.
I'm so happy to be here with you today. Thank you all for being here, for joining us. My name is Catherine Matisse. I'm Industry and Market Trends Director at the Canada Media Fund. And again, very delighted to be part of this wonderful discussion, wonderful panel with incredible immersive media creatives and producers. We'll be talking about many, many different things, I'm sure, ever evolving opportunities and challenges within the field, of course. And, we all went through this little thing called a pandemic, changed hardly anything, really, did it? We'll be talking about that, I'm quite sure, in just a few minutes. So let me present them to you so that we have a great panel starting for you. So first off, I'd like to introduce Loretta Todd. Loretta Todd is a visionary leader in Indigenous media and an artist with entrepreneurial energy and cultural knowledge. Very, very happy to meet you, Loretta. She's heading the I Am for Indigenous XR Media Lab, where she's the creative director. Next, we have Joanna Garner. She's the Senior Story Creative Director for Meow Wolf, where she guides the overall world building and storytelling strategy for the company's story universe. Welcome. And last but not least, Nancy Bennett. She's an innovative storyteller and visionary creative who thrives at the nexus of groundbreaking technologies, cinematic storytelling, and creative design. I love that bio. That's so energetic. I think that the first thing we'd like to ask all of you, and perhaps I'd start with you, Nancy, because I just introduced you in such a stellar way, is just to tell us a little bit about you, about your work, and what project you're working on right now.
Well, I've been working across the nexus of technology, music, and experiential for a long time. And I started in music as a trained musician, and I went into music videos early on. And that is how I ended up in entertainment and making content and media. So the thing about music that's really cool is it's always been a sort of prescient technology space. And a lot of technology that's born from music has driven other things. And luckily for me, that got me going in a lot of directions with media, new media, VR, doing crazy codecs and things like that in the early days. So naturally, when VR came along, I started doing a lot of that too. And because of the sort of cross-functional disciplines that I'm interested in, there's never just one project. There are always many. But through the course of my career, I've done a lot of different things, from television shows to music videos to doing immersive theme parks like Two-Bit Circus. And it's been really, really fun. And I think that's really what I can say about my career is I follow what's fun and interesting to me. And I've been very lucky. So there you are.
That looks like a great career plan. I'm going to try to do the same. That looks like a lot of fun.
I have fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Joanna Garner, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, apart from that one little sentence I said, from what you do at Meow Wolf?
Yeah. So I am lucky to be the Senior Story Creative Director for Meow Wolf, and I can talk a little bit more about the company, I'm sure, as the panel unfolds. But we make large-scale, immersive, interactive story worlds for participants to explore. And so I've been with the company for coming on 4 years now. which has been quite a ride. The company started as a small sort of DIY anarchist art collective in Santa Fe and has grown to, now we have 3 exhibitions, all over 20,000 square feet. Denver is well over that, with hundreds of employees, and so my background is in theater, as a playwright and immersive theater maker. So it's funny when you're talking about emerging technologies. A lot of the work that I traditionally have made in theater is really not tech based, is really grounded in super intimate story experiences that are really about like human connection and kind of wildness. And I love to make, in my own work outside of Meow Wolf, really site specific strange pieces that maybe happen like around a bonfire or in a kitchen or things like that. But I think Meow Wolf it's amazing in that it lets me have kind of wild ideas and then get them realized with all sorts of different types of technology, and different artistic mediums, and kind of a wide spectrum, because our exhibitions do utilize everything from like stapling trash to a wall to like using augmented reality technology. So it's kind of a broad spectrum, but it's a really exciting time to be in the company, and exciting for me as well to think about storytelling and especially theatrical storytelling, as I often do, in the context of explorable, playable worlds.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a lot of fun too. Wow. I mean, I have so many questions that just pop up into my mind, but I will wait a few minutes because I really want to get to Loretta Todd and hear a little bit more about you and what you do and how you do it.
Tansei, I'm so honored to be here, of course, with all these amazing, brilliant women, and also so grateful for the St. John's Women's Film Festival. You guys have been at it, a while now, so it's great to be invited. I'm also like to acknowledge that I'm in Squamish territory here on the West Coast, and really want to share a little bit about the I'm4 Lab. But I guess about me is I'm actually a filmmaker first. So that's really where it begins, and made, a number of films with the National Film Board. And I just did my first feature that came out called Monkey Beach, based on the book by Eden Robinson. But my heart has always been also with tech. Back in the day, we started something called the Aboriginal Art Center at Banff. And we held events like from drum beats to drum bites. Not saying drum beats aren't as good as drum bites, but to say that it's a continuum of who we are as Indigenous people, that, we're curious about the world. We like to know how things work, and we're always adapting new technologies. And so that's always kind of driven me as far as a filmmaker goes. But also when I also do a children's series called Coyote Science, which is about Indigenous science. And this year, Coyote Goes Tech. And in our series, we're, the Big Bang, our version, our theory of the Big Bang in story is alongside, we're looking at VR. Kids can learn about VR. They can learn about 3D printing. We're looking at, robotics, all the things that, important that our kids learn about, so they can adapt those and, again, interpret them through Indigenous lens. So the VR lab, or XR lab, is something I created about 3 years ago. I saw VR coming back into our community. And of course, I wrote an essay about Lawrence Paul, who did a VR back, over 20 years ago now, up at the Banff Center. So, we've been talking about these things. And, I even wrote a theoretical paper called Aboriginal Narratives in Cyberspace that apparently is still being very influential. So even though we don't use the word cyberspace anymore, but in any case, so then it kind of went away because it just, stayed with NASA, it stayed with corporations, stayed with all those things. But then it started to come back into the art world, and specifically into the Indigenous art world. And I said, well, what was really important is people don't have to go through what I went through as a filmmaker. As a filmmaker, I went to film school, but I got out of film school and I was still told, you need more training, you need to know more. And so there was always that sort of challenge as this Indigenous woman in this this, filmmaking world. So it was really important for me that these technologies coming into our community, that we be there at the beginning, that we can influence how they're used in our community, how we influence, the stories that are told, that we have all the technical skills, all the technical apparatus to be able to tell these stories. And that's basically what the IM4 lab is. It's inclusive. Anybody can show up if they're interested in learning about VR or AR, or now we're going into virtual production, they're welcome. All our workshops are free, and our participants range from teenagers to elders. They include artists, media professionals, linguistic professors, healthcare workers. So it's a real gamut of people who participate and really take part in the IM4 lab. Yeah, that's a little bit about what we do.
Wow, such important work. Wow, it's really impressive. Thank you again for being here with us today. And let's get this discussion started, because, my first question, when I see people, right, in this context of a pandemic, I was like, how are you? How are you doing? And how are you able to carry on? So that would be my first question to you. How has this whole pandemic we're going through impacted your work creatively? Because obviously it's impacted all of us in different ways, personally, professionally, and sometimes it kind of has twisted our ways of looking at things. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit about that from you. How has it changed your perception of storytelling? Has it changed your perception of storytelling? So I don't know who wants to tackle that one first.
I'm happy to. I've been a very lucky personal beneficiary of the pandemic, because I've been able to actually focus on my creative thoughts for a change, instead of being in service to a lot of other agenda. But I have to say that I've also been very politically active throughout this time, because I think it's been very painful to see so many people suffer, first at the hands of our previous administration, but also from the pandemic and the lack of truthful information. So that's definitely been there. But for me personally, I've been able to spend quite a bit of time researching and writing and really honing ideas, when most of the time, I think when we're working in the workaday world, we have to turn them out really quickly, because there are things like revenue and deadlines to deal with.
Yeah, those things. Yeah.
So I think that's been really fantastic for me personally.
So it gave you space. It gave you space to think more creatively, perhaps.
Yeah.
Is that something that Joanna or Loretta, you also experienced?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the pandemic has been good, particularly for introverts, that there's been a little bit more of like a lessening of pressure in terms of social, obligations and more space in that way. But it has, so much of my work, both at Meow Wolf and outside, is really about collaboration and also like being in a room with a bunch of beating hearts and emotional energy and feeling what that's like. And in some ways I've actually felt like, in a lot of ways, much more removed from the theater world. And the whole notion of Zoom theater is something that is incredibly unappealing and uninteresting to me. So I've really kind of checked out and moved away from that aspect of my life in a lot of ways. But from a Meow Wolf standpoint, we opened 2 exhibitions during the pandemic, which was wild. And to be like on site, and seeing people that you hadn't seen for a year and a half, but everyone has masks and we're all like trying to imagine what this exhibition will be like, and to create, really touchable, interactive art in a time where people are afraid to touch things, is challenging. And so we had to when we reopened the House of Eternal Return, which was our exhibition in Santa Fe, which has a lot of paper artifacts in it, we actually moved all of those online, and created QR codes that people could scan and access the documents under sort of the umbrella of a storyline of the Society for Peripheral Studies, which is like studying kind of anomaly and strange phenomenon, and they're cataloging all of these things. And so that was kind of a workaround, but there's something really that I felt is missing from like getting to pick up a character's journal or a letter or something like that. And so we're adapting, and finding ways that are maybe better or more interesting, but there's certainly things that feel missing and lacking, outside of obvious, extreme emotional impact of this like large scale grief and communal suffering.
Of course, of course. Did you also experience that, Loretta? Did you have to adapt creatively to the situation during the past year?
Well, there's two answers to that, because the one is as a producer, and as a filmmaker. So as a producer, we were going into our third season of Coyote Science, and basically it was either don't do production because we couldn't, or find some innovation around that. And I was so fortunate that over the years of hiring Indigenous directors and Indigenous camera people, and just having my crews generally 75 to 100% Indigenous, I had a very good network, and many of those people have kids, and many of them were living in their traditional territories. So normally, we, like to COVID, we certainly didn't want to send crews in, because we don't want our elders to get COVID, because you lose an elder, you lose, as they say, like a library, right? So I was able to kind of create these little bubbles where a filmmaker who had worked for me in the past, who had a couple kids and her grandmother and mother were there, could do their episode about, in this case, the tech of cedar. So we're not just looking at lithium, whatever, iridium, whatever it is that goes into like tech stuff. Lithium is probably the wrong word, but anyways, you know what I mean. The chemicals, the minerals that go into making these technologies. It was cedar is a really important technology to the West Coast people. Or food sovereignty, because one of the filmmakers lives up in Hazelton, and he's gone, built a house, built a farm, he's got a daughter. So, we were able to do that. So but it made it slower. And we did come do the odd shoot when, we had to do a shoot recently for kids, learning giving them a workshop in filmmaking where everybody had to wear masks. So that would be the first time we'll see that on screen in that episode, is everybody wearing masks, because otherwise everybody was in bubbles. It's definitely slowed down production. Yeah, and it's caused a lot of anxiety sometimes about keeping our children and elders safe. As far as the IM4 lab, we were about to launch. We were organizing a major gathering of Indigenous XR artists and professors and technicians, from all around the world. It was like a big event. We were excited about it. And I got that first call from one of our mentors and teachers, Dr. Leroy Littlebear. And he said, look, I don't think I can come. I'm just really worried. He's an elder. I don't know if he calls himself that, but certainly he is. And that was the sign. I said, oh, we're going to have to shut down. If he can't make it, then it's really not safe for us to hold this conference. And we were doing this actually before anybody else was, but that was the sign. So we moved it all online. And I have an amazing team, Colin Van Loon and Alana Shawanda Mandaman. We got a little tiny office, it's just really the three of us. We have a part-time social media person, and we hire graphic designers and instructors as needed. But we moved everything online, and we created something called Transference of Knowledge. And so we had basically many of the same people, but then we were able to add master classes. So with every webinar came a master class, and that allowed people to participate, not only just hearing us talk about what we do, but actually having a chance to do that. So we really embraced it. And that also allowed us to go beyond Vancouver. So most of our workshops have been in Vancouver. We do a lot of feasting and protocols, so they're lovely to participate. Everybody comes back because they only know we're going to feed them well. But so we weren't able to do that. But so so we did that spiritually. So every opening of every webinar had land acknowledgements from the different. There's more than like all the Indigenous nations that Vancouver is Vancouver's land is on, and then also we always had a DJ before every webinar, so that was always really cool too. But it allowed us to go beyond Vancouver, so we able to have participants from beyond Vancouver. And actually that kind of led us to deciding to put all our training on an app, which we're still in the process of doing, so that anybody who's remote and beyond Vancouver, they'll be able to access all the materials through this app. And then also we'll be able to add mentors to them and try to build a community within that. So yeah, in many ways it's been challenging. We're now just getting back into the office. We're trying to get this virtual production studio going. So that's kind of going to be a bit of a challenge because we have, you know, a modest budget to start the training at least. But yeah, it's been, and you know, personally, it's been sad because we lost a dear elder and had many friends and family who were sick. So it's still a challenge in the Indigenous community. It broke our hearts to see what happened in the Navajo community, and you know, and so it's been in here too. I mean, in many, it's been a real challenge for the Indigenous community.
Absolutely.
Well, like, you know, listening to you know, Joanna and Loretta, just the innovations that have been, you know, spawned as a result of the pandemic are really fantastic and impressive. And I remember talking to a couple of the folks that were working with you, Joanna, for the Las Vegas build, and just thinking, how are you doing this? I know with Two-Bit Circus, we built, you know, remote play that was both in person and online, which was really great for innovation within the theme park. And knowing that we had to shut down a theme park, which, you know, very much touch and, you know, interactive VR, et cetera. And, you know, the byline of the company is play elbow to elbow, you know, so it was a little tough for Two-Bit, but managed to get through that and also do a beta night last week. I mean, you know, I hadn't been around so many people in so long, and it was kind of delightful, I have to say, and everybody playing and doing things, but being very respectful of one another's space, keeping 6 feet apart, you know, all those things that you have to deal with when you're dealing with crowds now. Pretty difficult. So I think across the board, it sounds like all of us have made some positives out of, in spite of the pandemic, particularly the two of you, Joanna and Loretta, really great.
Well, can I ask a question? Can I ask you a question? I'm really curious, like what that looked like, the in-person and remote play.
Well, there's an outdoor space with Two-Bit. We've taken the parking lot and turned it into tables and chairs, circus lights. And so there's an online, you can join online, you can join on your phone, you can join in person. You know, there's an interactive supper club inside the space where it's 190 seat touchscreen interaction. So yeah, it's been pretty crazy. Yeah.
And because some of this interaction happens online, do you think that that's something that the pandemic did right in helping us find new audiences and reaching out to more people and getting, you talked about this, Loretta, getting outside of the Vancouver community and just trying to reach to bigger and wider audiences? Is that something that you were able to see and whoever comes online and experiences your work?
Well, I think one of the things that was also a challenge for us because of our limited budget. I mean, we have a modest budget, and you know, it's amazing what we've been able to do. We've trained probably over 250 participants, and so everything from introduction to Unity to advanced Unity to our AR for artists. So it's, you know, a real range of things. But what was good about going online is that we then got to focus on what can people actually make online. So we were doing a lot of WebVR, I think music videos and VR online, you know, things, and that attracted a lot of young people. I think a lot of our in-person participants were an interesting mix of people, but often women who were looking for a safe place to learn technology. Maybe women who were Indigenous women who had been working in a different field, but always had an interest in technology, but never felt safe going into those spaces. So that was a lot of our participants have been women who, you know, raised their families, and, you know, now they're ready to take a look at these, or had totally different field, healthcare, or, you know, other things, and now wanted to look at how to incorporate technologies into their practice and into the work they were doing. So by going online, it actually changed our demographic quite a bit. And we find we're working a lot with musicians and working with people who are, visual artists who, now can access this stuff, because they kind of were a little intimidated before when, we're doing Unity. It's like, oh, Unity, right? So now they can kind of, oh, I can make this. I don't have to know Unity to make this, And so it's yeah, I think those are one of the things. And I think that's one of the things we really want to do. That's another reason for the M4 Lab, is to kind of create technology that is accessible, that, isn't, you don't have to be rich. You don't have to have a computer science degree. You can just basically, make things with these technologies. And I think that's something that's really inspired the communities. And, we're just getting more and more people really like AR. And we actually we were part of a mural exhibit here, an AR mural exhibit in Vancouver. And we're just now, this week, we're in Mexico at a Canadian and Mexican Indigenous cultural exchange, where we brought a number of artists' work in AR to Mexico. So yeah, it's an exciting time. It is. It definitely has. But I think that's always been part of our, even without the pandemic. We have remote communities. They don't have bandwidth. How do they access this technology? And in what ways, and how can we make it more accessible? And what if they don't want those technologies? That's another, thing that we have to discuss, and we have to have that discussion. And that came up, and we had artists say, no, I don't want to do this. So that's fine. It shouldn't become something that's what you have to do in order to be an artist or be a filmmaker. But it's certainly something that, at least here, and you can take a look and choose, and we can then adapt to what is your comfort level or what works for your community and your practice.
Of course, that's so interesting.
When you're speaking about the reach and the opportunity during the pandemic, I think one of the things that has been interesting is that those who have had access to these tools have had a good, fast crash course in what they were missing. And that, the metaverse is alive and well. It may be nascent, but it's connecting. And there are some really positive things about that. Certainly a wake up to the fact that it's there, and now get more people involved and engaged, we hope, and hopefully in positive ways.
Oh, absolutely. That's the word is right. It was a crash course for a lot of people. I mean, here you are from, one day to the other, having this very captive audience looking for ways to seek entertainment and looking for new ways. And so many people tried so many different things. And so that's why I was asking about knowing if your audience was widened by this very particular context, because I know I tried new things during the pandemic, and I know a lot of people, because it shows in the numbers, tried new things as well. So the demographics, as you said, Loretta, changed a lot, shifted not only geographically but also in different cohorts with regards to age. So it's quite interesting. I'm guessing from a creative standpoint, it must have an influence on how you see the future, on how you see your next move, on how you see your next project, now that we're in this sort of very wide reaching setting. I'm wondering, Joanna, if you think about that when you think about your current work and what's coming.
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing the thoughts about the expanding audience, because we saw a really big uptick in our Reddit and Twitch and Discord communities. These folks that are really interested, particularly in like the deep backstory and lore and conspiracies, I guess, for lack of a better word, that might come up out of all of the different Meow Wolf stories. And I just did a live stream on Twitch week before last with some of these really awesome super fans. And some of them have never been to a Meow Wolf exhibition before, which was, that was really interesting to me, because I feel like we are thus far really a location-based company. I mean, we did release the documentary about our work, Origin Story, a few years ago. So people did have some touchstone to the company, and I think started to kind of grab onto this idea of this company that maybe is unleashing creativity and really wild thoughts and experiments, and I think a lot of the people on the live stream were really excited and interested to hear how we think about creativity in particular, and so less tied to a physical exhibition, and really about just like, how are you sparking your creativity, and how can I, as an artist of whatever kind, sort of take lessons from that. But it was still kind of a interesting moment to see these Meow Wolf fans who had never been to an experience just saying, okay, I'm grabbing onto this, and wanting to sort of unlock the story and the lore, and like teaming up together to say, okay, you're close to Vegas, so you go to the Vegas exhibition and take all the pictures of all of the, of these documents, and let's decipher it. And, they were saying to us, like, we think that in a future exhibition, this character and this character might meet. And, this is, when I started at the company, we were not really talking about this as a story universe. It was much more a, discrete experiences, that were each like sort of fully self-contained, these amazing art experiences. But as, the last couple of years, things have progressed, we've really started leaning into this idea of, this is a universe of a multiverse, really, that there can be lots of randomness, there can be lots of different characters and stories that emerge, but how can we weave these together? And a lot of that is looking at what stories and characters and ideas are emerging. And some of that is about co-creation and listening to fans. And the best way to do that is online, and right now it still feels like pretty nascent. We're literally just like talking to people or reading Reddit or talking to them, through like our websites or things like that. We don't have some like advanced co-creation tool yet, but it's really exciting to see people out there who are grabbing on to the possibility of that, how things can connect together and wanting that. And so I think in response, we are looking at how we can give those connections and develop those connections.
That's a great.
It's really, yeah, I mean, it's really incredible. And I think also incredible is the amount of time it takes to be engaged with something like that. That, audiences don't have more than 24 hours a day. So how are they doing all of this, right? I love the idea of a parallel universe where I could actually spend 6 hours on Reddit or be on Twitch and check out all of these wonderful things that are going on. And I think that's a really interesting dilemma as well.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting because I was gonna actually ask you a question about remote work, and I having this audience kind of co-create with you guys is remote work, really. So yeah. Is this a new thing? Is this something that really changed the workflow? Is this something that really changed how things get done? Or because you all mentioned it in some capacity, this is a team effort. This is, we're used to working as a team and a close-knit team. And all of a sudden we all had to work remotely, depending on where we're located. Of course, it wasn't always exactly the same conditions, but still in some way, part of the team had to work remotely. How did that change the way that you work? How did that have an impact on how you do things? You mentioned, Loretta, that it slowed down production to a certain point. Is there anything else that it brought that you may feel you would like to keep eventually when you go back to on location production?
Well, I think one of the things, of course, has always been like my cultural imperative, if you like, is that everybody in the communities and the nations have their own tools and means to tell their own stories, including the technologies, every new technology. And that's always been something that I've worked for, whether it's with the IM4 Lab or with, other trade programs or whatever else that I, initiated or was part of initiating. And so that's always been kind of critical to me, because for me, sovereignty, if we are sovereign nations, we are sovereign nations, and we are sovereign in terms of this, how we tell the stories, who tells the stories, the means we tell the stories. So, I remember talking, back in the day to people, before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there was also the Royal Commission. And there was recommendations that came out of that. And many of those recommendations both talk about how Indigenous communities have to have the tools and the means to be able to express culture. It's also an UNDRIP, the UN declaration. And so every nation should have those tools. It shouldn't just be a few rarefied, lucky filmmakers, even though we've had to work hard to get them. It should be there, broadband should be accessible. I remember back in the day when we did have that event to come Drum Beats to Drum Bites, we invited people like Buffy St. Marie. She's doing Cradleboard, way in advance of all of us. Which was basically distance education, through the internet. But one of the guys I remember talking about how, there's always trains and roads and so on coming through our lands and that. But back then he was talking about, but how stories are transmitted, whether now, fiber optics or, satellites and all these things, that Indigenous people have to have sovereignty over that as well. And so I think that's something that's really critical in kind of our purpose, if you like. How do we get those tools there? And how, we're the small little group. I mean, the First Nations themselves are, have to, it's important there, but when you're still dealing as your panelists may not know, but in Canada, there's still, I think, hundreds of Indigenous communities that do not have drinkable water. They have boil water advisories, and it's just unbelievable in this land that has some of the most fresh water in the world. As wealthy as this land is, our communities still don't have fresh water. So how can we be talking about broadband and VR and AR and all these other kinds of things? So it's sometimes it's a difficult kind of
Sure.
Where are we in in that priority? But certainly it's something that drives us. Things we'd like to keep certainly is the fact that we just keep advocating for this access. And I'm for everything's free. You don't have to you don't have to pay. There's no tuition. And in fact, with our virtual production studio, training, at least the training, we'll pay people to come and participate in this. So yeah, there's a lot. It's kind of heightened some things. It's shown how innovative we are, and it just means that there's a lot more work to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So the technology is always part of the equation now, but in terms of the community interaction, creatives have always anticipated what they think people are going to be drawn to. Their instincts are forward-looking. Amassing experience to sort of craft a new storyline. But now you have to do that with your audience. And it's a much more dynamic engagement, which means that barriers of conversation in the creative community are dropping down, which is pretty cool. It's just a lot to ingest and process and do something really constructive with. Yes, the technology is not going to be accessible to everybody, and hopefully we'll have inroads that will make it more accessible, and the speed at which things change and Moore's law will advance those opportunities. But in the meantime, what it's doing with its reach is putting the audience right in our heads while we're trying to work. And it's an interesting invasion. I think a lot of us used to be, like Joanne was saying, the introvert comes out. We have visions, we want to create. And so, it's not now about what's the revenue number we have to hit, or what does the advertiser need, or what is the sponsorship partner looking for in terms of stickiness or whatever, right? It's what's the audience really talking about? What's going to keep them engaged? How am I going to be adventuresome and modernize what I'm talking about as a creative that engages and includes what their thought is, which is happening prime time, live, and right now. And I think that's a challenge and exciting at the same time.
I don't going out of place here, so I apologize, but I wanted to pop in about that because I think that's one of the things that's really exciting to me, and always has been as an Indigenous storyteller. There was an elder, and I always forget his name, in Australia when I was doing research once, who talked about media, and he said, media, all this stuff is old news to us, because he said our villages were always abuzz with the exchange of knowledge. And I think that that's something that, in a way, we used to say when we were, sometimes say, you guys are just catching up with us, because that, in an indigenous sense, everybody is a storyteller. Like there are some people who are better storytellers, just like there's certain people who are the best carvers or the best weavers or the best, hunters, but everybody is responsible and can take care of that, and have a story to tell. And so I think that's one of the things that's really critical to us, is that, we nurture that, give the space for that. And I think that's what's kind of happening is, with these technologies, is that everybody is just realizing they're a storyteller. Unfortunately, sometimes they're telling stories that are hurtful and harmful, and, and in fact, suppressing storytelling in a strange way. And that democracy of everybody being a storyteller. But yeah, I think about that too. So that's what's exciting about, I think, our people, is getting our hands on these technologies, even if we don't all have access, because, the government keeps promising broadband, but it's happening slowly, but it's happening. Is that, how are we going to bring that idea that everyone's a storyteller into this space? How does that change things,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joanna. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you.
Oh, no. It's just making me think of, the challenge that we've had with, sort of trying to get the most sort of interesting and diverse group of storytellers in the room. For us has really been, Santa Fe is not necessarily the most diverse city. It's predominantly white, and it's a very large, affluent, retired community. And, before the pandemic, there were times where, I'd get funding and be able to bring in writers, like this amazing writer, Tyler English Beckwith, who, came in from New York and worked with us on some Afrofuturist stories. And, I was like, what would it take for me to get you to move here and be part of our writing team? And she was like, no, I don't want to go to Trader Joe's and be the only person in that store with an afro, and so when the pandemic happened and we sort of let go of that, well, a writer's room can only happen in person with the whiteboard, then suddenly we were able to open up our writer's room to, Tyler came back, and this amazing sci-fi writer named Eric Glover, who, we're able to create our Denver narrative with us in a virtual writer's room, where we're like working with Miro and doing a whiteboard together and having conversations. And yes, you are missing that sort of like in-person spirit that happens, but we created a pretty amazing story, and we're able to have a much more diverse pool of storytellers to tell it, just by removing the requirement of the location. So that was a benefit for us, for sure.
That's incredible. Nancy, you wanted to chip in.
It's a fascinating thing. I think, I don't know who said it, but somebody said at one point that directors are like midwives, right? They deliver the baby. But actually, storytellers, creative directors, the leadership team on the creative side is really more of an editorial function in a lot of ways now. It's not so much as a dictatorial, this is the vision, this is the treatment, follow this synopsis. It's really like bring everybody together and pull the collective threads out and try and parse them in such a way that it works in the interactive medium, or, and that's another fun task, right? And, it's hard to do interactive stories. It's very difficult. And actually, it might be even easier with a team of people, well, throwing stuff at a Miro board, because it is that tricky as an individual to anticipate how somebody's going to respond. And it's a very different world for telling, for getting into mediums and telling stories and engaging, I think, than it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Even when VR first started, it was really, stick this on. Wouldn't it be cool if, we're not in that space anymore. I mean, sure, there are super high-end 8K experiences where you are embodying somebody on a very linear journey, but and those are pretty fantastic, I'm sure, but they're not the things that people are after. We're after how we're going to connect with these tendrils of ideas that connect us all to a diversity of experience. Which is great and also very hard. It's new. It's new to a lot of us. Um, it may not be new to Generation Z and after, because that process is second nature. But the skills of the analog world are really important for those story skills for that generation. And how are we going to impart those, I think, is also important. Because you want, first and foremost, give me feeling.
Right.
Reach into my gut, grab my heartstrings, pull me into that world. The rest, I hope I can figure out. It's a fascinating moment.
Absolutely. You wanted to respond, Loretta?
Oh, just talking about analog. Actually, we're doing the role of analog. Because that's how I started. I went to film school. We did analog. But again, it's interesting because for this season of Coyote Science, with the filmmaking one, we're doing letting kids write on old film stock, right? So I mean, those kind of basic skills, that sort of tangible touching thing, I think is still really critical to filmmaking. But it's interesting when Leroy Little Bear, there was another panel that that I organized, and he was on it, and back in the day, and I remember him saying, talking again about cyberspace. He said, we always had that, because we would go out on the land and we would have these, we would be able to transcend the physical, if you like, on the other hand. So on the other hand, when Lawrence Paul made his first VR, his VR was about, using natural law. So you couldn't fly, you had to go through doors, everything kind of functioned within the natural world in terms of, those physical, parameters. So what I find really exciting is those kinds of things that we're bringing to this discussion, and and how do you look at, our storytelling is, primarily not linear. There really isn't. That's one of the challenges as a filmmaker I've had. It's like, we're not 3 acts, we're not plot points, with these little eddies, and stories can diverge and go off in all kinds of places, which is kind of the interactive experience. And for all these years we've been told, no, you can't do that, because then the viewer won't know where you're going. And now suddenly, like, oh yeah, it's cool to be, all these things that we were told we couldn't do. So I find it kind of like really exciting to see the how we could kind of embrace that and influence it, and see what it means to us. But even still, I mean, I find sometimes having these discussions, about the emotions, like, one of the things too is, or the story, or like, how are we trying to draw you into our world? And I keep bringing up Leroy Little Bear, but he helped me, he's influenced me a lot over the years. And I made a documentary with his community some time ago. And I remember him talking about this idea of bringing you guys into our sphere of influence. And that was kind of like the way it was often perceived when Europeans first arrived. It wasn't like, oh, you're gods, oh, you're ghosts. It's like, oh, these could be family. How can we bring them into our sphere of influence? Well, it didn't always work out that way. But, that's kind of what's exciting for us, is how we can bring you guys into our sphere of influence, and how we can have that exchange. We're really excited because we work with allies, we work with non-Indigenous people, we work with diverse people. We try to kind of create this family, if you like, and that's how we kind of like to see going forward. And I think that's one of the things about these technologies. They can help lead toward that. I mean, people talk about the empathy, factor in VR and things, but I do really think that there is that opportunity. And maybe I'm overly idealistic, but nonetheless, it's sort of what's drives us at Down4.
I love about this conversation is that it's actually quite positive. I mean, we're looking at this very difficult situation that we all went through, and we're still going through, and there's lots of very good positive outcomes that seem to be carrying their own fruits for the next little while. And so I see time passing by, and I want to just touch on what gets you excited for the future of this sector of the industry. What really gets your juices flowing and saying, "Oh my God, this is really You've mentioned it, some of you at many points in this conversation where we're lucky to be in this right now. Why are we this lucky to be in this right now? What makes this a very particularly exciting period for XR and the rest?
I think one little thing germane to the topic of this particular women's film festival conversation is that as women, we can actually get in the game a lot better than we used to. And this is, speaking from many years of being in the industry, it's great to know that the pathways are open in a different way than they were.
That's wonderful to
Not
hear.
a little thing, that's a big thing.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's pretty huge. And it's great.
Yes.
And it's great that, there's not only diversity, but feminine force in there, female force, feminine or not. It's great. So it's good to see. Yeah.
I think from my perspective, it's actually really dovetailing into the previous conversation we were having, or the previous question about experience design, and thinking of us as storytellers, as experience designers, but also, at Meow Wolf, we have a entire experience design team who are, we have the story and the experience team are one team, the story experience team. And we have folks that are much more well-versed and interested in the how of how the story gets conveyed. And so being able to have storytellers who can do that, like reach out and grab your guts and know, what kind of characters and stories and themes are really rich to chew on. And then you have these incredible designers who, can help figure out what medium is best to share that story experience. And, so like in a Meow Wolf exhibition, stories being told through, yes, written material and, artifacts and objects and things you find. And, but, it's also being told through this like interactive RFID experience where you're booping at things and changing the state of the world around you in the exhibition, and super interactive tech experiences and video content and audio. And it's kind of like this whole 360 world building experience, and having kind of all of these tools at your disposal, and people who are becoming more and more adept at being able to say, okay, I think this story point could best be conveyed through this medium. And so let's tailor the story to VR, AR, print, whatever it is. Then it makes that story experience so much more exciting and rich, because it makes sense that you're going to learn about this story through a website. You're going to learn about this story through a like crazy tech experience, rather than trying to just sort of force things together and say, well, we've got VR, so let's make a VR experience.
Right.
It's like really being specific about that. And that for me feels so exciting, creating this whole, metaverse of experiences that really tailored to a specific story and medium.
Well,
Very.
and I love that. And story and medium being, very closely intertwined now.
Yeah.
And as the tech changes, and this is also a challenge in this space, but as the tech changes, does it become dated very quickly as you're building that story? But the idea that there's a certain kind of immersive experience that works really well in a certain expression is really, really cool. And that's fun to have those choices presented. I agree with you completely, Joanna. It's cool stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that's a big part of traditional protocols of Indian government and Indian law is witnessing. So one of the VR projects that's going on right now is about food sovereignty. In the case, it's about huckleberries. And Tracy Bono, who's one of the matriarchs, part of the IM4 lab, is creating VR around that. But there's a lot of philosophy. It's not just, oh, we got to protect these berries so that we can have food sovereignty. It becomes part of a much bigger, how should I say, philosophical process and protocol process. And so those are really exciting about how, again, we can bring you guys into that sphere of influence, and you can kind of maybe understand more of that rather than just as, words on paper. So those are the kind of things that are really exciting. Some of the projects that we have upcoming. I think virtual production gets us really excited, although it's also incredibly daunting, because but because we shouldn't be able to do it. It's Disney's doing it. All the they're building huge studios here in Vancouver for virtual production, and who are we? But we're determined to do it because it does allow remote filmmaking, so people who can stay in their communities and still access the technology. We're finding that a lot of artists are saying, okay, we love virtual reality, but the learning curve or the access, even though you guys got a Titan, actually I think we're the only ones that got a Titan in Vancouver. I'm not sure, but not we manage that, but so just the way that we can kind of apply it in our unique situations, and see if we can make this virtual production studio. It's going to take a lot of what's the word, reaching out and seeing how we can collaborate. We do want to make it for Indigenous filmmakers, but also indie filmmakers, because that's the other thing, is that as these technologies become more rarefied and fetished, and expensive, can they still be accessible to indies? And indies always had a way of making them anyways, right? So that's kind of, if we can do that, well, that's what we're going to try to help make happen, but yeah, those are the things that are kind of exciting for us right now. And we're worried, we're worried, but but at least we'll be able to do the first cohort, and that's it's a good beginning, and we can kind of do that as a demonstration project and say that, hey, those skills are there, they're accessible, they're our people can do this and want to do this, and we'll you just again show that innovation. That's who we are. We're innovators.
I really share your excitement around virtual production. It's really great to see what's happening and what's coming as well. But yes, a lot of adaptation through it all, for sure.
I'm excited by projection. Get me out of a headset, please. Get me out of a handheld device. Just take me into the world and put me right there and give me some spatial sound. And I'm pretty excited about that space, because it's getting democratized by the price, slowly but surely. And it's pretty beautiful.
Can I interrupt again? Sorry, because I feel like I'm talking more. But anyways, we actually did that because that's one of the things that come up with our elders when we've had discussions. They've said, I don't really want to put a headset on because I don't feel connected. Like, I know there's people here, but I need to know that they're there. So we're really into dome projections. And one of our matriarchs has created this amazing dome with other artists of the last only piece of never logged virgin, like, forest, West Raincoat Coast Forest, that is not far from where I live, actually, because everything else has been logged. And so, maybe it's 100 or 200 years old, but this one has never been logged, 1,000-year-old trees. Of course, they want to log it, but they made a dome to experience that. And then another one of our VR artists we work with, Casey Corsican from the Yukon, Northwest Territories, he built his dome out of traditional materials, so moose hide and other things. And so that's exciting for us, is kind of bringing together that idea, that democratizing, so that everyone can participate in that experience. And elders who can't go out on the land anymore because of health and that, they could still experience the land, and we can bring traditional materials into that experience. So that's kind of exciting for us as well.
Oh, that is so interesting. I could go on for hours with a preview. I mean, I think it is indeed a very exciting time, and you've made it very clear to us that there's a lot coming our way with regards to immersive creation. So thank you a lot for sharing all your knowledge with us today, Nancy Bennett, Joanna Garner, and Loretta Todd. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And we're gonna be on the lookout for all of your work in the near future. Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you so
and
much.
You're all welcome to come to Vancouver, and when COVID is safe enough, we'll all treat you to a beautiful meal, and we would love to see you guys again, and any way that we can support you, and any way if you have any ideas for us, we would love to keep the dialogue going. So hi.